Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 8 of the Magnum Opi Podcast, now with new and improved audio, although far worse signal, so I may be cutting in and out. For all the millions that were awaiting us last week, unfortunately, I couldn't do it because of internet problems, but we are here now, with a much slimmer panel than usual. So going through who we have with me today, I've got Brandig.
Good morning and happy Sunday.
I've got the bloke.
Good afternoon and happy Easter.
And I've got Freelance.
Good evening.
No addition to that.
And happy account.
Not only am I joined by the guest, but in honor of the book that we're reading today, I'm also joined by a very large glass of brandy, as the protagonist seems to resort to drinking brandy at almost every trouble that he comes across. I thought it'd be suitable. As you can see from the title, we're looking at Day of the Triffids, published in 1951. Unfortunately, we don't have Quackhouse with us at the moment. Hopefully he can join us later on. But at the very first episode, if you cast your mind back, he told us all that it was his desert island book, and that's why I decided to put it on the reading list. What do people make of Day of the Triffids?
I liked the story. It was quite good. There were significant challenges with it, but there were other elements.
Mention the book and he shall appear.
There's the quacker himself.
Sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say I liked the book. It was a solid entry in post-apocalypse survival as a genre, but there were some glaring problems with verisimilitude and a reasonable explanation for what happened and why it happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I'll be honest.
Yeah,
I didn't think it was going to be bad, but as we'll come onto a slide in a moment, I had it in my head as being a sci-fi novel from the 50s. It's not massively well known now. I thought it was going to be a bit more pulpy than it turned out to be. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. Quackhouse, as it was your book of choice for the Desert Island book, why don't you give us a brief summary of what happens in Day of the Triffids?
Basically, the Triffids are created as the theory is that they're created as a source of oil to rival the fish oil industry, and then everybody. Sorry about that. Wife just walked in. Basically, all these plants are coexisting with humans, and they're kind of keeping them under control. It just so happens that they have a nasty sting, which you don't want to get stung by. But then something happens, and everybody goes blind, and chaos ensues.
Yeah, the sting kills you. Just to clarify, like pretty high fatality rate on the sting.
Yeah, and I think from the outset, anything that people do know about the book, they know what a Triffid is. But if you use the term Triffid, a lot of people understand that you're talking to, a moving plant or a deadly plant or whatever it may be. But one of the things that was new to me in reading it was that Triffids are kind of ancillary to the plot. They're not the focal point for a lot of the book. You have three disasters that occur. You have the Triffids. And then several years after, you've got comets or potentially comets that make everyone go blind. And then you also have a disease, which I think having multiple threats happening and all of them are ambiguous as to the cause, I found that quite interesting. It reminded me quite a lot of, and it's an inspiration of the author, of War of the Worlds, where every time they think that they've figured out how to combat one challenge, you have the grass appear, so there's a constant elevation of the threat.
Yeah, it lays down.
I was just going to say it's kind of got multiple Doomsday Devices going off at the same time situation going on.
Yeah, it lays down this idea, doesn't it, that there's all these satellites floating around Earth, all put there by various different global powers. and they're all like weaponized satellites that at any point could unleash some kind of pestilence or something down upon Earth, and nobody really knows who's got them and what they do. So there is this kind of undertone that the Triffids could be something to do with them, or the blindness could be something to do with them, or the plague could be something to do with these satellites.
Or all of the above.
Yeah. I mean, it could be like a triggering event that's caused them all to, like the idea of the one nuclear weapon setting off, then all of a sudden everybody else retaliates all at once. It could be that kind of scenario.
Yeah, and by a lesser author, I think that some of the ambiguity and some of the questions that we're still left with at the end, it could be frustrating. But to me, I think it worked as a narrative device of keeping everyone in constant confusion and escalating the threat, because you never know what's really happened in terms of the comet and why any of it's happened. So they don't even have a starting point for how to combat it.
No, because obviously the idea of a satellite at the time as well was quite a few years in the future, wasn't it?
Yeah. Just on the little quote here, I've pulled the first sentence from the book because I actually think that it's a fantastic way of hooking in the reader. There's quite a lot of wit to John Wyndham. He starts off the book by saying, when a day that you happen to know is Wednesday starts off by sounding like Sunday, there's something seriously wrong somewhere. And I don't know, there's something that it's quite an English kind of wit. It's kind of Dickensian, some of his wit. It reminds me of when we read Christmas Carol, the speaking of the house that looks like it's snuck in between two larger houses. There's that kind of vibe I get from it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of the people in the book as well. It's how you imagine people would have perceived the British as a peoples back in the 50s, before everybody went insane and,
So did we discuss the broad overall plot of the book?
We've had a basic overview of it, but if you want to go into a bit more detail, go ahead.
Well, just a plot summary, as we tend to do at the beginning of these. Basically, there's a situation of a global catastrophe, and a fellow wakes up in a hospital, and it's an in media res narrative where he is in the hospital recovering from a Triffid sting across his eyes, and he has had his bandages scheduled to be removed today, when he would be allowed to actually see again, theoretically, assuming he was able to do so anyway. And he wakes up, and cataclysm has occurred, and the story is about him trying to deal with the outcome and fallout of the cataclysm. Basically, the entire world has gone blind due to some sort of meteor shower. At least that's the ostensible reason. And as a result of that, everything has fallen apart, and society needs to rebuild itself on the backs of the individuals who are currently sighted. And the natural progression is a post-apocalyptic societal reconstruction narrative thereafter, where the Triffids play the part of aggressive culling organization that fights back, and basically it's the consequences of man's attempt to tame nature coming out to bite them in the butt again.
Yeah, as is a common theme with sci-fi, it's man versus nature, and or man versus technology, and nature coming back to bite us in the arse. Just on the author, the setting that we've just laid out, as Brandig's just laid out. If anyone has seen the film 28 Days Later, the opening of the book is very similar to the opening of the film, and the screenwriter actually said that he was influenced quite heavily by Day of the Triffids. The protagonist waking up in a hospital, and it's a fish out of water scenario, so that you can both educate the protagonist alongside the reader or the audience in terms of the 28 Days Later. I've put his full name. he used all of his names in different combinations as non-deplumes, which I quite like. I mean, it's a ridiculously long name. He has 4 middle names, so he just used different combinations throughout his authorship to hide his identity if he was releasing something pulpy in a lot of the cases, which he wrote a lot of. He wrote a lot of short stories. Which I think are probably varying in quality. Whilst looking through his biography, there's some connections that he had, not directly, but he had quite similar life points as Orwell. They both worked. Orwell worked in the BBC, but he worked on the opposite side. He worked in the Ministry of Information at the time during World War II, and he served as deciphering codes during World War II as well. I just found that quite interesting. So I've mentioned the word pulp already. This slide is purely for the fact that I found this image, and I think it sums up a pulp story pretty well. I just like the headline "Spicy Mystery." So, as I said at the very beginning, I thought it was going to be quite a pulpy story. What I mean by that is that I thought it was going to be a little bit more simplistic and a little bit more exploitative, not in the term that we use it quite often now, but in the term of cinema in the 70s when you have black exploitation films and things like that, where it's quite vulgar, it's quite base, and it's like popcorn cinema.
Is that because I suggested it?
No, it's just the general impression I had from it being a novel, like a 50s sci-fi novel. A lot of them were like, they started off as being in these, teen magazines, but when it came to the 50s, they switched over to novels, and you just had a lot of pulp being produced then. So that was what I had in mind, and I'm glad to say that I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't that.
I mean, as far as I can tell, it basically sets the groundwork for every zombie film that's come since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He had an influence on sci-fi writing that I think is probably underestimated. So, just go on to the influences. I've only put 2 here. As I've already mentioned, he was influenced by H.G. Wells. The man on the right is Lysenko. And does anyone want to explain Lysenkoism?
I don't think anyone could explain Lysenkoism.
Do you think Lysenko could explain Lysenkoism?
It's the Soviet alternative to natural selection. So natural selection, you could summarize it as survival of the fittest. And Lysenko said that plants would grow better if they, more in a communist regime, so that the strong plants would support the weaker ones as it is. So it's very weird. It caused a lot of political decisions, which caused a lot of famines. So.
Well, surely the strong plants block out the light for the smaller plants and stunt them.
Obviously, yeah.
That's what reality states, but Lysenkoism states the opposite.
Yeah, it opposes reality.
What, in communism? No, I can't believe it. Who'd have thought?
I mean, the whole book is kind of, the time it's written, it's a bit of propaganda as well, isn't it? It's there's a lot of elements in it.
Well, yes, it kind of uses Russia as a feared outsider. Yeah, but I
mean, there's the idea
they don't really do
like
anything with that.
But there's like the division of labor kind of element to the book, and that kind of thing, and just the individualism and just the way society should be constructed, and what all the little parts that are important. It's not just the big machine. You know what I mean? There's kind of a lot of that going on, I felt anyway.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the book serves as criticisms on certain ways of establishing society or government. It doesn't really give a positive view.
I mean, it's the fragility of it as the society as well. You know, the idea that everything basically hinges on, you know, the people's ability to see, but also that, you know, the guy controlling the switch at the sewage plant, or, you know, the guy operating some dial, you know, in some, you know, power plant somewhere, you know, without these people, everything grinds to a halt.
Yes, there's multiple times in which the protagonist and the female love interest say that they thought that, you know, that everything that was around was concrete and couldn't be changed, but they realized just how fragile society and modern technology and everything like that can be when in the face of adversity, as they've come into.
And that's one of the first major criticisms I have with it.
How do you think it's a criticism? What is your critique of that?
Well, it's the book takes as a premise that everyone, or the vast majority of people who find themselves blind, are going to be completely and totally incapable of coping at all. And I just reject that out of hand as an impossibility. The human mind, while yes, it's significantly dependent on sight, is much more capable of adaptation to deal with unexpected consequences or unexpected situations. So
to a degree, surely, but
well,
when you built a society around the fact that people can see, and then all of a sudden you took that away, like, you know, computer screens.
I think there's a certain percentage, isn't there, where maybe like 30% of society could go blind before we start having problems. I don't think you can get away with 100.
I'll just say it's estimated in the book that 10% of people have sight, although I don't know where he gets that figure from. But that's the estimate, that 9 in 10 people have lost their sight due to the comics.
Quite I mean, I would have said it sounds more like 99% lost their sight.
That's exactly what I thought. I mean, if it was 1 in 10 people, then some of the situations that first occur in the book don't really make sense, because you'd imagine if you have two, I mean, I know it doesn't quite work this way, but say you have 2 households of 5 people each. One of those households should be fine because they've got a sighted person in there. Just as a general rule, like, you wouldn't have these masses of thousands, in some situations, thousands of people hoarding together with just one person with sight leading them. I think that it's a bit inaccurate for them to estimate 1 in 10.
The whole of London, at one point they only had like 30 people, or what was it? The initial sort of meetup. I know that wouldn't be every sighted person, but the initial grouping up of into that building was not a huge amount.
Yeah, it was like 30 or 40 people that are sighted, and the rest were.
But also back then, I mean, I don't know to what degree you could leave it alone now and it would still function. But for instance, like the telephone system, you know, relied on operators back then. You know, someone actually physically being able to see which socket to plug which, you know, cable into to connect to phone. You know, so
I'm not at all disputing the fact that there would be a significant impact. I'm disputing the scope and the severity of the impact. And I'm also disputing that the individuals in power wouldn't attempt to retain control of said power by doing something rather than...
Would government collapse?
I don't think government would collapse without a fight.
Not if it was 1 in 10.
No, even if it were 1 in 100. The government would still attempt to assert authority. They'd figure out some way to get on the radio and start telling people what to do.
Yeah, you think so, wouldn't you? But then
police officers in uniform standing on street corners with their whistles, whether they were able to see or not.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of the people who end up being able to see in the book, though, are being able to see because either they were incapacitated in some way, either they were drunk, or, you know, they'd had a heavy night, or they were incapable of going outside. And, you know, so a lot of the people who could end up seeing weren't the greatest people to begin with.
Yeah, should we just quickly explain that? So what actually happens in terms of everyone going blind?
Yep.
Do you want to go for it? Or?
Yeah, can do. There's a meteorite shower which happens all over the globe, presumably at the same time, because people say they can see it during the day, and basically everybody who watches it goes blind, and during the shower,
it's supposed to be quite fantastical.
Everyone
has turned out. The radio's talking about it. Everyone should go and see the amazing meteor showers.
Yeah, one thing I did like is the fact that it started in California, but they were like, "It's California." That's the least strange thing happening in California.
Yeah, and the protagonist is complaining that everybody won't shut up about it, and he's he feels like the only person who can't actually watch it because his eyes are all bandaged up because of the Triffids thing.
And potentially, I mean, as we mentioned with the satellites, they say later that maybe there's a meteorite shower which struck some of the satellites, and that set off some sort of weapon which was designed to overload people's optic nerves and burn them out, something like that.
Or what they thought to be meteors were falling satellites. There's lots of speculation as to what it could be. But yes, yeah. So that's a really interesting point that I hadn't thought about, actually, that it's not just that it's a random 1 in 10 sample. It's that people that would have been in situations in which they wouldn't have gone out to see it were probably either immobile or, drunkards. There's quite a few of them.
It might have been like night workers.
Yes,
like
that's true. There might be a whole, like overnight power plant or something, or factory that everyone retained their sight because they didn't go out to look at it.
Well, they also mentioned
minors.
Yes, I was just about to bring that up.
Yeah, so there are
a lot at that point. There would have been a lot of active miners,
but they were from Wales, so they wouldn't cooperate.
Well, he mentions Wales and said they've just set up these little pagan tribes. So they're probably all of these miners that can still see. Like, no one went blind.
Civilization never really reached Wales in the first place.
They just reverted to being Welsh.
Well, then are they really truly alive?
Yeah, it is 1 in 10 people. It didn't say Welshman. No. So let's move on to the next slide. Just before you go,
I just want to say Lysenko. Really, I'm getting strong Bond villain vibes off him.
Oh, massively! Look at that. I mean, that jawline is powerful.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to mess with him.
And I think maybe he would look even better if he had a scar over one eye and a misty eye, and maybe a tiny square moustache
and a white cat.
It's like he sees a child eating a muffin and he's really hungry, which I can imagine being Lysenko.
I mean, given what he did to the crops, it's probably true. He's probably looking at the bloody cameraman, thinking
that capitalist child with his capitalist muffin must be.
Actually, he's probably watching somebody eat the third biscuit.
He's watching H.G. Wells eat the third biscuit.
I don't think there were 3 biscuits in Russia.
Right.
Did we talk about The Land of the Blind from H.G. Wells, which is an influence?
Well, I spoke about H.G. Wells in general being an influence, but not that one.
So he wrote a story which is about a mountaineer in South America who gets into a valley where everybody's blind, and he basically turns out to be a king, but because he can do stuff they can't. But they're really worried about this sight thing he has, and they want to correct that by making him blind in the end. So it's a really not really happy story, but it is mentioned in the book, and I can imagine that having a land full of blind people might be an inspiration to this story in particular.
Yes.
Yeah, it mentions the quote, doesn't it, in The Land of the Blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Yes, and then they go on a bit of there is some smarminess in some of the book when it's that sort of new atheist. Well, actually, don't you know that the quote isn't what you think it is? So there's a little bit of that in there. I feel like it's very much written by an Englishman, but for an American audience, because a lot of his stories were published in American pulp magazines. Obviously, this one being written in the 50s is a little bit later on, but it feels like he's still targeting that audience. So just on the legacy, I think, as I said before, the book is not as well known. It's known for its adaptations into a couple of TV series, which I haven't actually put on here. But the general term of a Triffid is also kind of in the public consciousness, I feel. There were 2 sequels, neither of which were written by the original author. Gentleman called Simon Clarke wrote a sequel called The Night of the Triffids. And in that, it was set in North America, and some of the Triffids grew to 60 feet tall, which I think is a little bit ridiculous, but would be very interesting. It would just be interesting to read that adaptation. And then there's also been one written last year called The Age of the Triffids, in which they sail back over from the Isle of Wight to lead a final stand on the mainland Britain against the Triffids. There were plans to do a 3D film version, which I think would be quite interesting to watch, although 3D film is kind of dead in the water now. And on here, I've got, as you can see on the pictures, I've got a little figure, which is the Shambling Mound in Dungeons and Dragons, but in Italian, it's called the Slouching Triffid. So this was me in a very sleep-deprived state, finding the most boring trivia possible. Very interesting. Which leads us on to so this character here. I'm not a weeb, so does anyone know who he is? His name is Crayon Shinchan, and I don't know why this tickles me as much as it does, but there's a Japanese adaptation of say the Triffids called My Moving Story Cactus Large Attack, which just entertains me a great deal. And there's also a band over here called the Triffids, which were just like a generic alternative rock 80s band.
But they were all blind, right?
that was a
gimmick.
Would have been a good gimmick, but no. I mean, looking at their dress sense,
he led all the others.
Looking at their dress sense, that's a possibility. On that point of dress sense, I do like at the very beginning of the book, there is a man walking the street who's blind but still put his tie on. I respect that.
Yeah.
He says he's obviously chosen a tie through touch alone, but the fact that he went to the effort of putting his tie on, I enjoyed.
Well,
so,
he also met another guy going down the street who was blind beforehand, and he was wondering. He talked to this gentleman, and he's like, "Oh, so everyone else is blind? Ha ha ha! Take that!"
Yeah. There's a bit of a bitterness about him.
I can't remember in the book, but in the movie they go to a blind like monastery place.
I think later on in the book, when they're trying to build one of the societies, I can't remember which one, they actually get a load of
blind girls.
Yeah, and that's another thing that strikes me as odd, in that they basically decide instantly to destroy the core component of society, that being the monogamous marriage.
Just like the first thing they do is like, well, we're going to have to end all our values. Our moral system's going to have to go right away.
Yep.
I mean, did that not happen post-war?
Yeah.
Or pre-war? So I'll just put here the 3 disasters. We spoke about them already. We haven't really touched on the plague. But the Triffids, through various speculative means, arrive and become a common plant across the world. And then a few years later, you have the comet that blinds everyone. And then following up shortly after is a plague.
I have to say, I really want to bring back pouches. I think they're superior to pockets. I mean, you've got one pouch and you can clip it. You just belt it onto anything you're wearing. It's brilliant.
Those are called purses.
No, it's not a purse. It's attached to your belt. It's a utility pouch.
Oh, so man purses.
Pouch. But it's
that's
not
a fanny
slung
pack
over your shoulders. It's not slung over your shoulders.
There's a fanny pack.
No, it's not. It's not the belt itself. It's attached to it. So you can see in the picture clearly. It's clearly a separate concept.
I do feel like just that alone on normal dress would look out of place. But if we're talking about going back to dressing as plague doctors, I'm behind you.
I'm not entirely opposed to that either.
It might happen. It might happen.
I do
Seen
love
weirder stuff recently.
Yeah,
It's not
stranger
too
things have
far from
happened.
reality, is it?
I do love that. I've only just noticed, but here is a sand timer on the end of his little staff, which is a bit ominous, given that he's a doctor. But we shall carry on. So I have laid it out as the characters and then the locations that they go to, because they're all quite separated set pieces. Just on the disasters, we touched on them just then, but anyone have any speculation on whether or not it's man-made, or if it was a comet shower, or what are people's ideas?
I think it's a man-made comet shower.
I think it's man-made and caused by the comic shower.
Yeah, that's what I'm leaning into.
Mm-hmm. So you think the plague was on one of the satellites, and then was brought down to Earth via the comet shower?
As was the wavelength attack. I think it was triggered by meteorite impacts on the satellites, and that activated their Doomsday Shroud.
Yeah,
what about?
I wonder what other potential, doomsday devices that we don't even touch on.
Yeah,
that might have happened. Maybe in America they had a whole other set of issues.
In America in the 50s, they probably just had a load of lysergic acid in a satellite, and that could be a really interesting story. Yeah, I lean towards that as well. But what about the Triffids?
Well, they're supposedly man-made by the Soviets for farming, but I got the impression it could have almost been like they designed them for farming, but also intended as a bioweapon for their enemies. Like they would be all the enemies would be like, "Ha, those look so easy to farm. We'll just copy them," and then suddenly Triffids take over.
I just wondered if it could be a like from the standpoint of like talking about nuclear, like it's something that was kind of created by man as a good, but inevitably turned out to be something that wasn't so good.
Mm-hmm.
I think nuclear is exactly the opposite. They started out by making bombs and ended up trying to make it good.
The Triffid doesn't. It's so biologically impossible. I am having a hard time characterizing it as anything that makes sense.
I know this has been the biggest debate that we've had: is could a Triffid exist, or at least is it plausible that a Triffid could exist in some fashion?
Well, I'll have you know that there's a short story by Kelly Lagor that apparently explains how you could genetically engineer a Triffid.
Well,
okay, that's perfectly fine. It's just a question of energy storage.
Well,
yeah, I do
you've
imagine
been debunked.
There was some. I was thinking of those cicada bugs that store up tree sap for like 13 years and then they roam around for a day. That's the kind of best version I can imagine for a Triffid.
Yeah. Which I don't even think he mentions in the book, that they exist as a way of rationalizing their existence a bit more.
Oh, I can certainly
really
understand them as a migratory creature, but they can't travel hundreds of miles, and they can't move for hours at a time, and they certainly can't be able to outrun or run down people.
Well,
if they were designed so that they're rooted into the ground, and then when they sense prey, they can uproot themselves, attack the prey, kill it, and then grow the new roots using the energy they get from the prey, but then have to stay still again. I could kind of understand it, but they are just like free roaming sort of zombie plant things.
It does say that they do need to reroute. They can't just roam around indefinitely.
Yeah,
that's why they avoid. That's why they avoid some of the most built-up areas, because there's no effort to reroute.
But at the tail end of the book, and I don't know how much we're jumping ahead here, they're talking about huge roaming herds of Triffids.
Yeah.
Which is just impractical considering the biological nature of the Triffid is to be an ambush predator.
Yes, maybe photosynthesis provides such little energy in comparison to people. It's carnivorous, so maybe it is willing to potentially sacrifice itself by looking for prey over remaining rooted.
Well, that's where the communication system comes into play, where they start talking to one another.
Yeah, but they have these wooden little sticks that they can rattle to communicate with each other.
Yeah. And again, actually, credit to the author. I feel like he's very good at picking up on sentences that might, from a lesser author, be missed off. That there's a lot of mention of the smell of the area, and there's a lot of mention of sound because of their communication with these tapping sticks. I feel like it gives a real good sense of being there, and it really does make them quite visceral. So let's move on to the actual characters, the two main ones here. And apologies for some of the low quality images, but this is what we have.
Is this the BBC series?
It is, yeah.
This is what the 80s looked like, Albion.
Yeah.
It was all low quality, desaturated colors everywhere. It's not the camera or anything. It's the way it looked.
Just like in the 40s, it was black and white, right?
Yes.
I think 80s Britain was just desaturated though.
Yeah. Well, 70s Britain was. They taxed the saturation of Britain. So, what have we got to say about these two?
Let me see. He is a guy who kind of accidentally got into the life part where he's right now. So his father wanted him to be an accountant. And it turned out he had no head for numbers, so he became a biologist, which was very useful later on because he already had hands-on experience with Triffids before the disaster. She was a degenerate teen who wrote a scandalous book and had a hard time living it down and became the most pious, what do you call it? Just a countryside housewife. So she made a big change.
And what was the name of her book?
There was the word sex in it, and I forgot the rest. So,
Sex is My Adventure.
Oh yeah. Nowadays,
it sounds like some sort of woman porn to me.
Yeah, it sounds. I mean, 50 Shades has probably got nothing on that, but
yeah,
she does feel bad about it.
Yeah, well, it's kind of explained as that she only named it that because she was told it would get publicity, which it did. Still degenerate though. I really like the protagonist in this. I think he's really well written and he's quite level-headed. I think I really enjoyed him. Yeah.
I think
a lot of protagonists in these sort of survival things, like I don't know, they're not as together as he is. He just seems to get stuff done.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was very proactive and pushed the narrative rather than being reactive. So he took action to move things forward and was intelligent in his decision making.
Yeah, and he was thoughtful as well. Like he looked at, he could see more than just his own angle. Like he knew, like as we get through to some of the other characters, everybody's pretty stoic and rational and level-headed. Even some of the more idealistic ones, can see, the situation they're in.
Yeah, none of them are painted as purely awful people. They're all given their time to explain why they're doing what they're doing, and even if it's wrong, you can at least empathize to a degree.
I would just wish that a similar level of coherence were brought to the rest of the world. So that the rest of the world building were undertaken with the same level of logic and intelligence. I'm still I'm still miffed about the whole massive collapse of the government and any sort of organized group to survive this in any way, shape, or form.
Well, they actually did in the end, but they wanted to institute a feudal government.
I mean, it depends how good you think the current government could do. You know, if you took away one of their senses.
Well, my opinion on the current government is well established. Even though they are in possession of all 5 of their senses, it seems
I don't think that if tomorrow we all woke up and there was 1 in 10 of us blind, that our government today would be able to do anything. I think they're too incompetent to do anything with all 5 senses, let alone losing one.
Irrespective of their competency, I still would argue they'd attempt to do something.
I mean, the kind of the bureaucratic system that kind of runs everything. You know, they're not the greatest, are they? They're not like the good and the great, are they? Let's face it, they're a bunch of pencil pushers. Most of them.
I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think it doesn't affect my enjoyment of reading it as much as it seems to affect yours. Because I could understand that there's a possibility that they would do something, but I can also read this and think there's a possibility that they would collapse, depending on, again, the amount of people that were blinded, and the initial day, how many people died, because a lot of people topped themselves on the very first day.
If the situation was exactly the same, except for we had the government of today still cited, just transported into this book, I just think they'd be useless. I just don't. They're just so incompetent. I mean, maybe the government of the 40s had a higher degree of competency, you know. But there's no real leaders anymore.
Well, the book makes quite a few references to it, doesn't it? Like the division of labour and these, you know, all these services that we take for granted. You know, everything from, you know, water, telecommunications, electricity, sewage. You know, they all rely on people to run them. You know, and the idea is that the people who run these things that you never have to think about because they always work, all of a sudden the people who run them can't run them anymore because they can't see to run them, and you know, everything grinds to a halt.
Sadly, I was just taken by Triffids. I think one thing you have to take into account that in 1951 was a very low level of automation. Lots of things were still done by hand. So
like I said, telecommunications, you know, would be a big example of that.
Yeah. So nowadays we have computers to run stuff that those didn't exist back then.
Well, I've heard
I wonder how much automation we would have today that would survive that situation.
This calls for an experiment.
I mean, I think I've heard things said that, you know, if you know, the electricity were just to go, that within like 48 hours, everything would basically turn to crap.
I understand and appreciate that perspective. That doesn't stop me from thinking that there would still be some effort made by those in power to retain power.
Yeah, but you know, what would Boris Johnson do if he couldn't go on television or, you know, pick up a phone?
That's all he knows how to do, is just be on television. Just
there'd be a radio broadcast saying "Triffid lives matter" and embrace plant diversity.
Well, with
we're doing this,
turning a handle to generate some power to power the CV radio.
We're doing this to save the environment, to fight global warming.
Let the plants
you should be happy to get eaten by this plant.
Yes, do your part.
At the very beginning as well, I think it's the second chapter when they explain some of the backstory after the initial setup. Our old friend sneaks back in as well. There's a little bit of Malthus mentioned, just about some population control issues.
Mm-hmm.
That pesky Malthus seems to be popping up in everything we read.
He does, yeah, and he's so wrong.
But so attractive, apparently, to the intelligentsia for the last 300 years.
Yeah, and it's still not happened.
Well, yeah, exactly. Who needs evidence to disprove a theory?
Well,
Right.
didn't they were panicking recently because their efforts to control population had worked so well that the population was now dropping more than they want.
Yeah, except I saw that as well. There was an article about if we don't change how we act, we could depopulate the entire planet. Except that's not true because the population. Well, let's not go into that. Certain groups are populating more than others. I'll just say that. Anyway, what do we think of her, Josela? Josela? I can't remember how to pronounce that. They all have quite strange names. None of them are just John Smith.
Yeah, well, she's a bit of an she's a kind of an it girl, isn't she? Almost.
Yeah.
A bit of a socialite. Maybe not. She's very middle class, isn't she? Upper middle class background.
She has a practical streak, though, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Again, going back to saying how it's not a pulpy novel, some of their interactions are the closest that it gets to that kind of smarmy American 50s dialogue. But she is grounded. She's not just this. The archetype that you'd find in some of these stories if it was a lesser story. I think she's a bit more complex.
When they went off to get supplies, they sort of split up to get clothing and whatever, and she comes back wearing a ski suit with some sort of like Bowie knife or something, and he's sort of like kicking himself for not thinking of in that level of practicality. Yeah,
whilst he's dressed up in a day suit. So yeah, she does. She is more complicated and more interesting to read than she could be in this type of story for the role she fulfills.
Yeah, she strikes me as like the horsey type. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Upper middle class, get on with it. Horsey type.
She's definitely not the scream queen you would expect in the US pulpy version.
Yeah, and there's even reference to that, and I wonder if it's a sly poking at that, where they meet because she is sighted. She's one of the people that still retained her sight, and the way that Bill finds her is that she's being dragged along the high streets of London, or the streets of London, and he's the person that's holding her is holding her captive to use her vision to help him, and he's attacking her, and she screams, and Bill saves her, and the interaction afterwards, she says it's completely unlike me for me to be a scream queen. So I wonder if that way that they meet is kind of hinting at the kind of character she could be. But then he diverts and makes it something a little bit more interesting.
I mean, and whereas he doesn't see the meteorite shower because he's because of the Triffids sting in his eyes are bandaged. She doesn't see it because she'd had a heavy night.
Yeah, and possibly got drugged. Do you think someone put something in the punch?
Definitely.
So date rape was a thing in the 50s as well. So
roofies are from all ages.
Right. Okay. What do we got next? Anything else to mention about these two characters? Okay.
She becomes his motivation for most of the book.
Yeah.
First 2/3 of the book. Basically, she's the first sighted person he meets, and they bond, and then they get separated, and then basically for I think half of the book he's looking for her. And in the end, they meet up and they live happily ever for 5 years after.
Yeah,
happily ever for 5 years.
About-ish, yeah.
Okay. As well as those two, we have Susan, who the first chunk of the book is quite close chronologically, but then we have quite large gaps in between. So I think in total the book spans about 6 years. So when we first introduced her, she's around 9 or 10, but by the end she's established herself as a bit more of a character, and she's in the region of 16. I think again for a child character, she's well done, and develops as a character and kind of gains a personality. She's not written about a great deal in the book, but she is one of the more major characters.
Yeah, she actually has a character arc that, again, is an accurate representation of reality and not a caricature. It's perfectly reasonable, and this is one of the things that most authors and most entertainment writers get wrong, in that they treat children as one-dimensional and completely incapable of dealing with adversity or engaging in intelligent thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, none of the characters really do anything beyond the realms of possibility, and they're all pretty, pretty stoic and level-headed. Including her. She's
that allows me to plug something that doesn't exist yet, but I'm currently working on a script for a video of looking at child characters in a certain film. So yeah, I agree that they're usually just they're usually used to put in a position of trouble, so that the audience will be more concerned about them than it would be if it was an adult. They just use boilerplate images of children.
It's a certain film, Cuties.
Well, yeah, they're either that or some kind of MacGuffin, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's not. It's well, I won't ruin it. But no,
it's not much of a plug.
Well, it's well. Look, I will say it's not Cuties. There we are. That's as close as we're going to get.
Narrows it down. Yeah.
Is it Children of Men?
Yes, they don't use children as a MacGuffin in that.
It's probably the Goonies.
No. I'm going to leave you guessing because I'm going to move on to London. Right. So I've separated, as I said before, some of these groups into the locations because they're quite encapsulated, each of the locations with the characters he meets there. Very few of them he comes across again. So in London, that's when he first wakes up and finds that he's lost, that he's sighted and everyone else has lost their vision. What I do love at the very beginning of the novel is just how quick people are to off themselves. The first man he comes across immediately throws himself out of a window. And the second, well, not the second person he comes across, but the second person he has a major interaction with, he gets drunk and then goes and kills himself with the rest of his family.
Yeah, so, his wife. He says his wife's the brave one. She's already off herself.
Yeah, she's turned on the gas already. And I'll say during one of our other discussions, it reminded me a lot of the M. Night Shyamalan film. What's it called? The Happening. When when the plants just make people off themselves. I just had flashbacks to that.
Was that him made that film? I had no idea. I'd seen it.
Well,
with Wahlberg in it.
Quality with such quality as Wahlberg. Who else could it be but M. Night Shyamalan?
I don't knock the Berg.
All right, I won't knock. What was he called? Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch.
Yeah, I was just Funky Bunch there as well.
Anyway, yes, London. What have we got to say about these characters? Coker.
Coker is. Go ahead.
No, you carry on. You go.
Coker is the kind of guy who is really practical. Is not afraid to use aggressive tactics to get what he wants. He thinks ahead and he tries to save a lot of people in the beginning, and that goes horribly wrong. So in the end, he joins the scientists, concluding that's the most probable course to success.
He's an intelligent, bleeding heart liberal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's also going along with Brandig's take that the government will still pull through.
Yeah, there's a certain group of characters throughout the book that are convinced that the government are just going to suddenly turn up and everyone's going to be fine, or America will turn up, or
Yeah, I wanted to mention this. They use a term which I actually absolutely loved. There's two terms used which came out to me. One of them was that he used the term "scattered community," which just made me chuckle. But when they were talking about America coming to rescue them, he coined the phrase "American fairy godmother," which I love. It kind of establishes everyone thinks that America, even in the 40s or 50s, obviously it was written in 51, but it might be set just prior. America's already become this hegemon that's going to babysit the supposed empire.
Well, take into account that they already came to help twice over with each of the world wars.
Yeah, exactly. They've already kind of, but in the public consciousness of the Brits, they've already established themselves as that figure, as the big brother.
It's the backup plan.
I mean, and the fact that the state that Britain was in, or was supposed to be in at the time it was written, everything's pretty good in the book. You know what I mean? Up until it's happened, everything seems to be going quite well. Everything seems to be quite nice.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we get an impression of that either way. I mean, obviously they mourn after what they've lost, but it could be pretty awful, and I think they'd still be mourning for what they knew previously because it's such a big difference. But yeah, I think on the whole, you get an impression that they've come from quite a happy society.
I mean, if you can imagine it, by the time the book finishes, London's become some kind of diseased cesspool.
Well, I was just on the subject of disease.
Sorry, become. Are we talking about in the book or
on the subject of disease? I noticed that it was the plague only seemed to afflict the blinded, the blinded people, didn't it? And I didn't know if that was because everyone else had their shots at the start and they somehow got inoculated against this plague. Because
I think that was. I think that's the reason the author brought the section about them getting inoculated at the camp with the colonel.
But I almost could imagine, though, that it's this plague only works on people that have been blinded. Like it's been designed to attack the blinded targets, as a co-attack.
Yeah, working alongside something else that came out of a satellite. Yeah, it's
but
possible.
Also,
I didn't even.
It could also be a matter of hygiene. That it's harder to remain hygienic when you're blinded.
Yeah.
Well, seeing what you're eating, really, isn't it? Especially in a society where you're basically having to scavenge food.
And it could be proximity. A lot of the sighted people go off on their own, whereas quite a lot of the blinded will cluster together to try and work together. But I don't think any of those. I think, as you say, it was how you described that. It was either the inoculation or the fact that the blindness and the disease are linked to what came out of the sky. So should we talk? Obviously, we've got the characters listed there, but should we talk about the actual first society that's proposed when they go to the university?
Yeah, initially it sounded like my idea of hell. But, towards the end, it's not so bad.
It was very progressive.
Best of a bad bunch, isn't it? I think.
To which one are you referring? Are you referring to Coker Society or the Colonel Society?
So the Colonel Society. Let's just start on that one.
They're both terrible.
I mean, the Colonel Society is a kind of scientism society, isn't it?
Top-down rationalist.
Everything has to be. There's a limited amount of sighted people. And there's not. We need to repopulate the Earth, so every man's going to have to take like 7 wives, and all of them have to be blind, and just all the kind of Western morality has to go. Everything you knew about morality, we've just got to forget it and move on.
It seems to be very biblical to me.
Yeah, it was just.
I mean, if you
it's Mormonism taken to an extreme.
if you take Sodom and Gomorrah and then Lot's wife turning into a salt pillar and then he had to repopulate everything, that seems to be in this direction. Like, okay, which women are around right now which I can use to repopulate?
Well, the first thing they started to do is debate each other and have meetings and set up bureaucracies. Like the first thing they did was set up committees and people to decide who could do what.
Lanyards were handed out.
Yeah, lanyards were distributed widely.
No doubt. It's funny. This is not anything related to what's in the book, but to refresh my memory, I listened to the audiobook that's freely available on YouTube, and the character that actually discusses their thoughts is Scottish, and the narrator sounded a lot like Millennial Woes. He had that very soft Scottish accent, and so he started to sound quite convincing.
But
use of rhetoric.
Whenever you hear somebody spouting bad ideas in Parliament, more often than not, the Scottish, aren't they? Let's face it.
Or David.
We've all got one in mind, don't we?
Not just all of them, but they're either ginger or Scottish. And I know I keep mentioning gingers.
Those two things usually come hand in hand. And actually, it's appropriate you mention gingers, because who else have we got on this list?
Good old Torrance.
But yeah, and then the next society, obviously, that pops up is Cokers, isn't it?
Yeah,
Cokers was the first society.
Well, it's the first he
in
encounters,
what
but
sense?
they don't really explain what the society exactly is. He encounters Coker before anyone else, but he doesn't really know what the society is beforehand.
He overhears the conversation about that and what Coker wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Coker had formed the society until that attack.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just a group of people following him because he was the one shouting to let everyone into this. It was a university, I think.
Yeah, it was a university.
And basically, what Coker wants to do is shackle sighted people to numbers of blind people, so the sighted people can basically help the blind people survive by telling them
spread them out throughout zones.
Yeah, distribute them so there was so you had a number of blind per sighted.
So Brandig's point on it being a liberal conception, I like, because in some aspects these two societies that are being put forward are quite similar, but the difference that you have is that the one being put forward by the university is very rationalist and that kind of reconstructing a society in a quote unquote objective way, whereas with Coker it seems more like this bleeding heart liberal, very benevolent society that he's trying to put forward. But both of them have issues that come from the same place. Yeah,
but with go on, carry on.
They have different optimizations criteria. So Coker tries to save as many people as possible, assuming that the Americans somebody will come to save us. The government will come along, or somebody else will organize something. And the people at the university assume, like, okay, what's the best strategy we can have in order to maximize our survivability in the long term?
Yeah, and also Coker doesn't account for the disease either. He doesn't, it's not a thing at the beginning.
Yes.
Or the Triffids.
No, well, nobody does it?
Nobody does.
Yeah. It's only the main character considers them a threat. Everyone else almost looks at him like he's mad for even thinking that the Triffids might be a problem.
Yeah,
they're plants. How far can they walk? Think about the energy.
At first glance, it seems strange that they wouldn't consider them being dangerous, but I think what he's getting at is that they've become this just accepted part of society that people just put up with, and people. I like the fact that there are these deadly plants, but people just dock the stings, and they take 2 years to grow back, so they just cut them off and let them roam around in their gardens. So they just keep,
and it becomes a status symbol.
Yeah. So that, I think, it's because they've just become so normalized and so accepted. That people just don't even consider them to be a threat anymore.
But they also stay out of the cities, don't they? They're not other than in parks and people's back gardens. They're just not a thing. Yeah,
well, there's also the issue of people generally don't understand just how many there are, because some of the what are they called, nurseries in it? Some of the places in which they're growing the Triffids are kind of kept underground, so people are aware that they exist and aware that they're being used for energy, but not quite aware of how many there actually are being grown.
I mean, at the start, like Coker, I thought, Coker, he's terrible, general leftist, annoying person, and then he kind of proves to be a bit more level-headed than that. A bit more open to new ideas. He's quite an open character.
Yeah, he's humble. He can accept the fact that he's made a mistake. Quite a big mistake, but he does move on.
Yeah, well, he didn't appreciate the kind of the levity of the situation in terms of like it lasting. Nothing's coming to save you, basically.
Yeah, and obviously it's day one in which he's first asking these people for help, so he could be justified in thinking it's just this temporary thing. Who wants to talk about Torrance? We haven't touched on him yet. I mentioned him, but we haven't actually explained who he is.
He's the ginger, right?
He is the ginger.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much how he's described through a lot of the book, as the redhead or something like that.
Yes,
but he's part of a separate faction, or he is a separate faction, which they right at the start they bump into him with also leading a group of blind people, going around looting. But the difference is he's armed and actively will pursue any other group that he interacts with and try and kill them, basically. But then,
I mean,
you see these much later.
No, carry on.
No, it's all right. You can go.
I was just saying, you see these people when you're out, don't you? They look like they want to punch you straight away. They look like they're either about to start a fight with someone or cry. That's how I imagine him.
Yeah, he's clearly a street tough more than anything else, and he's found himself in a situation where he has the opportunity to basically have absolute control over his territory, and he immediately overreacts to anything he perceives as a threat or a challenge to his authority, which is classic. And he also acts in a way to basically gather as many resources to himself as possible, which is why he seemed to be attempting to capture the blind people and turn them to his needs and kill all of the sighted people. Now, it also, later in the book, he's shown to have joined a group of strong-armed toughs who were establishing essentially a second feudal period, and had, in some form or fashion, actually co-opted the military. Whether they were the military or they merely got access to military equipment is not really discussed in any depth. But
did he join them, or was he more like actually the leader of it? I thought.
I get the distinct impression that he was co-opted by them, which was the point I was about to raise, in that I can immediately see him cowering before what he perceives to be significantly powerful authority that would put him in his place through this, in the same fashion that he would put other people in their place.
Yeah.
So
he was already acting as a feudal lord in the beginning.
Exactly.
Of the book.
And it would be perfectly reasonable and easy for him to bend the knee, as it were, to another feudal lord whom he considered to be stronger than him.
And there's also gingers are more susceptible to radicalization than the rest of us.
That's factually accurate.
It is.
Any particular gingers you want to point out? Or?
No, just that gingers are disproportionately likely to go off and join ISIS.
Look at those people that have converted to Islam. White people that have converted to Islam.
There's a lot of gingers there.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Disproportionately so. I can't remember the percentage, but it's high.
It is genuinely a thing.
Given the low number of gingers in the world, pretty much anything that any group of them choose to do is disproportionate.
Sounds like a ginger apologist.
I don't create this. I don't create the stereotypes. I just observe them.
Okay, let's go on to the next.
To be clear, To be clear, no ginger has ever hurt me. I just developed his opinions.
Some of my best friends are ginger.
No, they're not.
I just want to drop a little story, right? A little anecdote.
Is it about a ginger?
When I was going to check out my university choices, one of the ones I went to, driving along, and there's this ginger on the side of the road, and we just drive by him, and he just kicks the car.
Whilst you're driving,
he just really angrily kicks it and like storms off. I still don't understand, the inner workings, but.
Right. Okay. Let's move on to the next location and the next society. Who wants to cover this one? It's the supposed Christian convent that she makes, Florence.
So this is supposed to be a quote-unquote accurate representation of the true Christian morality, where they're all going to depend on the Lord and work in harmony and basically glorify the current traditional society. And it is apparently immediately revealed to be completely and totally stupid and horrible and not worth the time that they're spending on it, yada, 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 yada. It has potential, as Corker says, but the people put their silly morality ahead of practical reasons and refuse to join the greater, better order of recognizing reality and completely and totally bending the knee to those with the lanyards.
You sound quite dismissive of the interpretation.
That's probably because I am.
I don't think it was a dig specifically at religion.
Then you clearly have a different way of reading than I do.
I think it was.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the dig was not at religion, but at the British version of Christianity that is meek and mild rather than like proper strong religion.
I mean, I would have thought the kind of like the Mary Whitehouse type, which some of them kind of are in this colony, like would be quite good in a dystopian thing where things have to get done, and
she would cut a Triffid in half. She
moral finger wagging, finger wag it to death.
She would censor the Triffid.
The whole characterization is they have the abilities and the capabilities and the manpower to handle it, but they are refusing to do it for no other reason than that's just not the way it's done. The blanket rejection of women taking on disproportionate or non-woman tasks to make ends meet is completely and totally, first off, incongruent with reality. Because if you take a look at history, any frontier history where there's prevalence of Judeo-Christian morality, women do whatever jobs are absolutely necessary, up to and including the jobs that men are better at doing because they have to. They're focused on practical necessity. So
they're early on in they're early on in this thing, though, aren't they? It hasn't necessarily hit them yet what they're going to have to do.
Well, be that as it may, I don't understand. I don't see that they're making any. The author doesn't seem to be making any. What's the term? He's not making any allowances for that to be possible. Basically every interaction that the author presents between Corker, who is the voice of reason, and the mistress in charge of this place, is arbitrary and dismissive of Corker's reasoning, rather than listening to the reasoning and judging it on its merits. Same thing happens when he talks with the woman who I think is darning clothes or something.
Yeah, I mean, Coker, he takes objection to the fact that they've got all this stuff and they're just doing nothing because they don't know how to use it, and they don't feel they're still in the stage. No, but they haven't looked. You know, I mean. And I think most men in that situation would look around every square inch of that place to find every single possible thing. You know, I mean,
they had a generator and they didn't even know that it was there or how to turn it on or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people would be able to start a generator. You know, you gotta pull the choke out, you've got to turn on the ignition, and you've got to pull a cord. You know, you got to. I don't know. I don't know. I can imagine giving a generator to a decent percentage of people in a city and them not being able to start it.
Nowadays, you need a compatible iPhone to start
Yeah.
Have you got an app for that? Yeah. You could also argue that because Copacabana has just moved from quite a benevolent mindset to being this more selfish mindset, that he's being even more negative against this society than he would be anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he's not having a go. He's having a go at her mentality, not as a religious person, but just as a feckless woman in his eyes.
It does seem a little bit like the whole thing is a straw man of religion that the author has set up just to beat religion over the head with.
I think that was intentional, but I don't think it's quite as bad as it could be.
Which goes hand in hand.
How
with
could it be worse?
All these progressive societies that are suggested. You know, these kind of like Mormon societies, as you put them.
Yeah, well, that's why, because he's attacking a church that if you're actually religious, you're happy that someone's attacking. You know, that sort of false benevolency, I think, should be attacked because
I mean, is it suggesting that there is a point in society where once you get down to a certain level, that religion kind of needs to be put on the back burner in order to
it's quite funny
pull things through?
It's kind of the opposite, isn't it? I thought that the more a society collapses, the more you need religion to hold everyone together.
I mean,
yes, exactly right.
I think you mean spirituality, because
you need to have a common set of morals and values to minimize conflict within the society.
Yeah, it depends on how subverted that organization is.
That's what the scientists are doing by sending them to Guernsey.
Yeah,
you also need that the hope element, you know, that religion can provide. When a society is that hopeless, I think that's when anyone who can offer a shred of hope is suddenly welcomed.
I mean, you've got to think, if this book was written or even set, well, obviously it couldn't be set in after the 60s without knowing about the 60s, but if the 60s had happened when this book was written and set, then it would be a bit different, because the 60s, you know, made everything a lot worse.
I wonder if it was set today, what societies would have been presented to us, what examples of different societies.
Yeah, well, everyone's deracinated enough as it is, so it would just be this sort of land grab. I think a lot of not much cooperation going on.
In a lot of especially like American kind of thinking, Stephen King kind of science fiction horrors and things like that, like is it The Mist or whatever, the religious people in those are kind of portrayed as just not feckless, just pure nut jobs.
Well, the Mist, I think that's the one I'm thinking of. The film version of that, there's as soon as the proverbial hits the fan, the religious woman in it makes a cult immediately.
But everybody, I know it's a tangent, but everybody goes from kind of looking at her as this weirdo who's obsessed with, you know, her religion, to being part of it. As she doubles down, they join her.
Well,
Whereas this book,
this whole situation is again going back to a point that I made in one of our earlier discussions. This is a single generation problem. The kids are going to have sight; they're going to be able to see. So there's no reason to massively restructure society to deal with what is fundamentally a temporary problem.
but as it explores later on, it's a question of how well information can be passed down.
Yeah, I think the two counters to that are the ever-growing population of the Triffids and the information that's been lost, and the deterioration of either the technology or the engineering or anything like that. They can't go back to what they once had because no one knows how to operate it, or very few people know how to operate it.
I mean, it's pointed out that they've got a jump start on their ancestors because they do have libraries full of information. But then also it goes on later to point out that these books are written with the understanding that people have a basis, for the knowledge. Like whereas the kind of the people know nothing. They're starting from scratch, and obviously the children of the people who know little about something will know even less. Whereas the books are written from the standpoint that about, I don't know, how plants grow, or photosynthesis, or just anything. I mean, if you don't teach it, if you don't pass it on, there's a lot of that in the book.
Yeah, and there's also the factor that certain knowledge can't just be written down and passed down through text, but it's this more word of mouth or shown through action that can't be properly translated, just written down.
I'm not going to say that there's not going to be a significant challenge for reteching up, but there are going to be books that survive the 10-year whatever it is, and those number of books can be increased by the actual judicious actions of the cited to preserve and protect them. So the argument that there's going to be massive loss of technology is spurious. There's going to be some moderate loss, probably I would argue negligible loss or minimal loss if it's handled intelligently. But it's only a 10-year problem. You get a 10-year-old who can see, they can actually be the eyes for a dozen humans, a dozen adults who can't see, as evidenced by Coker and Torrance's position.
That's 10 years of trying to feed everyone on without being able to farm to feed everyone, like going off of canned goods. And there's a massive decline in population, so it would be more difficult than I think.
Take a look at what happened after the Black Plague.
Yeah, there was a massive drop down of population and of technological growth.
But there was a massive corollary increase in the standard of living and in the way that people, the wealth of the individual after the Black Plague.
Apparently, people would just claim like a whole street because everyone had died in the street, so they'd just be like, "This is my street now."
Well, they'd go and find a farm and just say, "Well, this is my farm now." But that's true. But the system didn't collapse under the Black Plague, and if the system has collapsed in this, then some of the incentives for or some, I don't think the going back to normal would be quite as easy as that.
No, and like you would be able to teach a child how to fix a generator, for instance, like how to take apart an engine.
Can you do that right now?
What do you mean?
Can you explain your child how to take apart an engine?
No. But I'm saying someone could. If you had a mechanic, even if they were blind, you could probably muddle through changing the spark plugs on a generator or something. But you wouldn't be able to manufacture a set of piston rings. You wouldn't be able to. You wouldn't be able to manufacture. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to manufacture a spark plug. Without a factory. You know what I mean?
There's a lot of knowledge which is passed on, by direct teaching. That's the textbooks have a lot. I mean, they mention it, don't they? Like when he's trying to learn to farm, and there's a lot in the textbooks that are just kind of assumed that he would know.
Yeah, I mean, you'd end up with something like Cuba, where they've got cars that they've been trying to keep going since like the 50s. In another 50 years' time, when elements of those engines are worn out, and if you've got no ability to replace them, if you have no factories to replace those parts, or you've got nobody who knows how to forge metal, because you need lots of other supporting things to be able to forge something. I like a forge.
Or like space travel. Wasn't that a massive issue where there was such a period of time where no one was really pushing on satellites. I don't know if it was satellites or the actual rockets, but they had to get a load of people out of retirement to actually figure out how to repair damaged ships, if I remember correctly.
Well, they're still dealing with that with people who write in COBOL and mainframes.
Mm-hmm.
COBOL programmers are retiring, and people who currently have live production systems still running on mainframes that still run on COBOL don't have any programmers. But that doesn't take away from the main point that this seems to be a massive overreaction.
I don't know. I can see where you're coming from, but I think you're relying on humans to be a bit more rational than they're going to be.
I understand.
So let's go on to Beaminster. Good old Beaminster. You see.
So I just want to mention the last place. I think someone said the last place was fictional. The location. Tynesham or whatever it's called.
As far as I know, all locations except London are fictional. I mean, I never heard of the Isle of Wight.
Where is this, England?
Can you still fit the entire population of the world on it?
I don't know. Those pictures that I found purely from me looking up the names and then putting them on.
But the previous pictures from the movie of the location for Tynesham.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the other locations in the book are actual real. Tynesham, yeah. I think the other ones are real locations. Whereas I think Tynesham is I remember reading somewhere it was a combination of two towns. For some reason, they just needed to make somewhere up.
This is just the property in which it's set in the film location, I believe. Yeah, it's not an actual place. Beaminster obviously is real.
Just thought it was interesting that they decided to make up one place, but then use real places for the others.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe it's nothing quite fit what he was looking for. I'm not quite sure why he did that. But whilst we're on geography of that type, I'm fairly certain that this is an actual town in Beaminster or around Beaminster, if I remember correctly. Something similar to Stefan Brennell. It's like Stefan on Brennell or something like that. So he's just named the character after a town nearby. I'm just going to look that up. Now, why don't you go through these people whilst I just double check if I'm pumping out fake news or not.
So Stephen Brennell, who I can't remember who he was.
Was he the blind man in the cottage?
These are the three that they come across when they're driving the truck, and they come across a group of three people. So the radio man is the guy that ends up flying the helicopter.
Was he like there was something to do with they had a crash and they were in hospital during the whole event, so that's why they didn't see it.
Yeah, they were in a countryside hospital, weren't they? After a bus pulled out on them, and so the hospital was full of casualties from the bus and from their car.
And I think they assumed that basically everywhere was even worse. Like there wasn't anyone left. I'm trying to remember what they had their own little mini plan. I think were they hoarding resources or something. I think they were kind of assuming someone would rescue them.
Well, the first thing that they were worried about is they were expecting hordes from the cities to start moving into the countryside because the cities were so desperate and full of plague, obviously. But no, they didn't account for the plague, which is why they weren't going to get anybody from the city, because basically everybody in the city was dead or dying.
Oh yeah, and they had hoarded enormous amount of firepower. I seem to remember machine guns, flamethrowers, mortars. I mean, they had lots of stuff. Yeah,
they were a pretty good bunch. I mean, the guy the radio man who just assumed that he'd be able to fly a helicopter.
That was a little bit ridiculous. It's like, oh yeah, I know how to operate a radio, so I'm sure I'll be able to fly a helicopter.
Well, you laugh, but it's not all that complicated.
If you understand the basic principles, and it's a very simple helicopter, I don't think it's that insane.
No.
Okay, maybe I'm on. All right. Well, I'll follow suit as soon as I see one of you fly a helicopter.
I can fly a drone. Use that. You know.
I can fly a plane.
Well, I can't fly either, so I
can fly a desk.
Should a horse fly?
Yeah, I've never seen an elephant fly.
They're huge elephant flies. I mean, you need a special elephant fly gun for that.
The real danger is when they land on you. It's not nothing else.
I mean, I've never met a radio man neither, but
I'm also a radio man.
Part man, part radio.
Didn't television kill him, the radio man?
You beat me to it.
Television man killed the radio man.
That was an epic battle.
I mean, TV was in its infancy, wasn't it?
That was such a tangent. I don't even know where to begin. Yeah, so I've already made this point, but it's this character here, Mrs. Fawcett, that really pushes the Americans are going to come and save us.
Yeah, that's her mantra, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So these people, when he comes across them, when Bill finds them with Coker, and they're one of the few people that haven't really formed a society. They're just there's these three, and they've also got three others that aren't with them as part of the group. So it's quite interesting just getting another perspective from a group that aren't, this new established society, but are just fighting for survival like they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I said, they were expecting trouble from the city, weren't they?
They're initially defensive, but then quite reasonable as soon as they get to grips with what's going on. Yeah, so this is, I think, where there is a nice balancing act of this. There's a lot of people that are acting on emotion and not acting in this way that Brandig is recommending, that they should take this 20-year view and get their arse in gear. But you've got that on one hand, but then you've also got people like this where they in these small groups they are quite rational in what they're doing. At first they're quite apprehensive in their interactions, but then they don't start attacking each other. It's quite a reasonable conversation between the two of them, and they help each other out. So there are pockets of people that are possibly going to survive because they are being more sensible, but the vast swathes of people are not going to fare too well. There's some isolationist groups where even approaching the town, you'll just be met with a hail of gunfire. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I think they even shoot at planes or something.
Yeah.
And that's a clear demonstration of the difference between high trust and low trust societies. And how effective and valuable trust can be within and amongst societies, within and between societies.
Yeah, that's Brighton, isn't it?
Yeah. I love it. You don't want to go near Brighton because you're going to get it shot at. I was like, wow.
That's also
where the future.
It's also where the ginger goes, isn't it?
Yeah, again, that makes sense. A lot of degeneracy in Brighton, so.
Wretched hive has become a villainy.
So to explain, we have the last location, unless you want to count when they go to the Isle of Wight, Cherning Farm. This is where
the Shire.
This is where our protagonist finally finds his love interest again. And the people that are there before, sorry, I never forget. I never remember her name because it's Josela, because it's just slightly odd. It never sticks with me. When she gets there, there's already people occupying it, and two of the people are Joan and Ted Danson, which just made me chuckle. Yeah, so there's a bit of a Chad in this one. I'm trying to remember who it is. It's Dennis, isn't it? That on the first day of going blind, he's able to create a mesh helmet to protect himself from the Triffids, put on gauntlets, and leave a trail back to the house from the city so he can collect supplies.
This is an example how hard time creates strong men. So all the weak men just jump out of windows, and you see all the strong people, people like Josela, they just survive and actually thrive. You could say they thrive a little bit in these circumstances.
And is it his wife that's pregnant as well, or is it one? Is it?
Yes,
I hope for him. Yeah. And the other one got hit by Triffid.
Yeah. But he sees it as to him, it's it's not the end of the world. It's like a big challenge, isn't it, for him? That's kind of why he keeps going, because he sees it as it's like something that's just very, very annoying. Well, more than very annoying, but you know what I mean. It's
well, he sees it as an obstacle to overcome.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
He's straight away. He's asking for textbooks to learn Braille. He's doing everything that he can. He's got that very Chad mentality. He's not going to let it get in his way.
And that's my core point is that he's not an abnormality.
Yeah, I'm not so sure.
I think you have more faith in people than I do.
I mean, like I say, I've got a generator, and I'd put money on over 70% of the people that I would come across wouldn't be able to start it.
Okay.
Well, that's today though, but back in the early 50s, I think
30%.
In the city, I mean, my sister ran a horse riding stables, and they had kids come up who've never seen a sheep, let alone, had to fend for themselves in any way whatsoever, other than having to navigate the mean streets and people.
If you pluck someone from the city, even in the 50s, and put them on a farm, a lot of them wouldn't even understand what animals are there, let alone how to begin farming.
They made a movie about that in the 90s called City Slickers.
Yeah, but I've seriously met a 16-year-old girl who didn't know chicken, who hadn't comprehended that the chickens in the stables laid the eggs. Like she hadn't connected the link that the eggs in the stable came from the chickens that were wandering around the yard.
And
or
what
the chicken that they eat is chicken.
And what was her response after you informed her of that?
Kind of just amusement. I don't know, really. It was it was.
Did you help her identify the part the nuggets come from?
She obviously accepted it, but it hadn't occurred to her, which is more the point of the woman who hadn't occurred to her that to look for a generator, that there might be a generator. It's these people you got to deal with. I mean, eventually they would figure it out, but obviously it takes a while.
That's just my point. That's my only point, really, is that necessity is the mother of invention, and the reason humans have gotten to the top of the food chain is we're damn inventive when pressed.
Oh yeah. But obviously some people need more pressing than others.
Yeah, undoubtedly. But that doesn't invalidate the inventiveness of the species.
You're saying it might take longer to get a society going than you think.
There's also a difference of it being a gradual evolution of technology compared to being thrust into this kind of situation. I think that people might not be quite as resourceful if they're thrown into something completely new. Some people will, but a lot of people will fail. And a lot of the ability for humanity and society to recover is based on the ability of the sighted people. And going back to what we mentioned earlier, which is something that I hadn't even thought about, a lot of the people that have retained their sites you might find that they're not the kind of people that are going to be the most beneficial, because a lot of them are, as I said, the drunkards that were unconscious during it, or people that were in some way immobile and hospitalized, so they couldn't see the comet. So there's a lot of hurdles. I completely understand where you're coming from, Brandig, that there is a way of getting past these hurdles, but I feel a bit more cynical about mankind, I suppose.
Have you got the? I don't know if she's on the list later. The elderly lady, she kind of delicately puts it that she'd self-medicated. But she's quite
I had the landlord, but I hadn't put her. No, I can't
posh
remember
lady from the village. I can't remember her name now. But she's quite well to do, isn't she? She's quite posh, country woman, and
Yes, exactly.
She didn't want to leave, and he just told her to go and have a look around the town or something.
Yeah, she didn't think it was that bad.
Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I know.
She comes back and she's like, right, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that kind of reminded. There's some parts of it that kind of remind me of Shaun of the Dead. That kind of take a look around and see how bad it actually is. Yeah. So, I think that's really covered most of the main characters and the societies that they come across. Which one would you join, Quackhouse?
Well,
if it was a choice between the ones presented to us.
Initially, the thought of joining the group that's set up in the university would be my idea of hell, with their meetings and the discussions, and the idea of being on the farm seems quite nice, but then it's not a plan that can last that long.
No, especially with this feudal society growing, you're going to be crushed at some point.
Yeah, so maybe the idea of being in a small group of people that are like that would be terrible, but on a grander scale, it kind of waters it down, and you can kind of find your own niche. And if you could, so it's the difference between running that little farm with a society around to support it and having to run the society as well at the same time. If you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you can always go to the island, and if you don't like it, you can go to the Channel Islands.
Yeah, well, I would probably, I would go to the island, and I would, keep away from the gingers.
I find that quite an interesting choice.
I think a non-strawman version of the Christian society could have been an interesting choice. Especially if you
depends
look at
who's there to make it up.
Well, I was just thinking, you look at some examples of like Christian societies that are quite effective, like the Amish. If that happened with them, they'd basically just carry on business as usual, wouldn't they?
They'd be absolutely fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's just if there'd been useful people among, the knowledgeable people among that community, it might have been okay. But if it's full of people who have never even done any physical work in their entire life, and just a few vicars, English vicars, I can't, honestly don't see as being the most practical people in the world, because otherwise they probably wouldn't be English vicars.
What do you mean? They've got bull pits that you can, or bull pools?
C of E. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
I would just join the miners in Wales. They have fuel. They can last a while.
Yeah, they might have had the day off though to go and have a look at the shower, in which case they'll be knackered.
I'd go with the bloke on the non-strawman Christian community, but given the choices presented in the book, the Colonel all the way.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to fight with people. You're going to wind up near the top of the pecking order, and you've got all the wives you could want.
You're just in it for the harem.
And if you don't like it, you go to the Channel Islands, which is a lot better than being on the mainland.
Yeah.
I do like that Channel Island has become this sort of I don't know, this Hunger Games-esque island that it might not all be bad. They might have made separate societies on there because he says that they're doing quite well over there. But you could go over there and just begin raiding everyone. That's
the best thing about the Kernel Society, though, is that they do eject people that don't want to conform to their set of ideals. So they do have a kind of purity concept.
Quality.
Yeah, quality control.
I mean, if it's like a case of you can go and do what you like and you can come whenever you like, but if you don't, but only if you want to abide by our rules, we're more than happy for you to come and go, but you've got to stick with us, our rules while you're here. As opposed
Hopper's
to
dream, isn't it? Come on a 6-month temporary contract, and then the society can reevaluate it afterwards. It's like
but it's basically as long if you can come here, but as soon as you start to cause trouble, then you're out.
Yeah,
which I like the sound of. Yeah.
The pub landlord.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention him on there because I quite enjoyed him. He's just
for some reason I'm imagining the that guy's, the landlord character, the comedy.
Al Murray. Yes, I probably could have worded it a bit better. We haven't mentioned Walter, who's sort of the Triffid whisperer that works with Bill at the very beginning, who sort of prophesizes what's going to happen in the book.
Well, he sort of talks about the dangerousness of their intelligence or potential intelligence with the main character in the past, when they worked together.
He's the one that points out how Triffids are optimized for non-vision, whereas we're optimized for vision, and remove our vision and the Triffids become the apex.
Yeah.
Which seems to be the core of his criticism.
Yes. Although I don't really know if sight is the only thing that I don't know. It does seem a little bit
he it's a little off, because there's a lot of stuff humans have that is beyond sight that the Triffids lack. Yeah. But by the same token, the author really hammers home that point through that character about the sight being the optimization.
Yes. So who else have we got? The doctor. This doctor at the top is the doctor that throws himself out the window at the very beginning, which I found very entertaining.
He believed that he could fly.
I just I don't know. I don't know if it's written to be comical. I feel like it was a little bit of black humor, just how quick some people were to throw themselves out windows.
I think some people just immediately thought, well, this is it, isn't it? I don't want to be part of this this like downfall to come. I don't know whether people would actually turn that quickly to suicide, because I think that.
It could also be temporary. You don't.
Yeah.
If blindness has come out of nowhere, it could also go. Yeah, it could be a temporary thing. So who knows? But
you have to take into account that this doctor felt utterly useless because he didn't even realize where he was in the building. So he couldn't. And I think that the blindness came on really quickly. So this would mean that if there was nobody to help him, he would have probably panicked so much that the only reasonable way for him to get rid of his panic was to jump out of the window.
Mm-hmm.
Again, weak men get killed in hard times.
Yes.
He didn't have his soma.
There's a little bit of Lord of the Flies, I suppose, in this as well. Umberto, I'm not going to even try and pronounce the rest of it, is the man who first introduces the Triffid oil. So again, it's this setting up of potential backstories, but never really confirming it, which, as I said previously, it could be quite frustrating, but I think the way it's done is very effective at just creating these constant little tidbits of, well, this could be the cause or that could be the cause.
It sets up a lot of plausible stories that might explain it, which help to answer the reader's questions about it, but it never confirms it. It doesn't need to actually.
A lot of
It's an
intrigue.
excellent way of establishing the single narrator perspective used throughout the book, because the guy through whose eyes we're seeing the story doesn't necessarily know all of this either.
Yeah, and on that, so I should probably mention it's the way it's written is a diary of his accounts written to everyone else that's on the island that they end up on at the very end. So throughout it, there's little tidbits where he says, particularly at the end, he says, "Oh, some of this account is mentioned in this other textbook that's been written," or there's parts where he says, "Well, current records think this, but I think I witnessed this happen." So it's written. It's got that layer of sort of being educational to the current people in the island society. So it's quite an interesting writing device.
I see a badly written sequel where the protagonist has to fight Umberto Cristoforo Palanques in his volcano lair because he's the mastermind behind it all. And
the gingers come in and pick up the pieces.
They fight on this bridge over lava. Somebody has the high ground.
You were the chosen one, Umberto.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, that a poorly written sequel would bring that character back because his death is never confirmed. So then they could use that. But here it's like, basically he probably was on that plane, or he's never heard from again. So.
But then does Walter nip in right at the end and save the day?
Yes, that would be the corniest way to end.
Walter, he also disappears, doesn't he?
Walter comes in last moment to take a hit of a Triffid sting, blocking William from getting hit with it. I think that would be the way to end the book. We may as well write it right now. We've got the ending.
Well, in the film version, of course, it's a submarine that turns up to save everyone.
Yeah, I mean, and if it was now, then there would be a good number of those, wouldn't they, kicking around?
Yeah. And they're probably quite a good thing to survive with, because the nuclear subs go on for a long time.
Food is usually the limiting factor.
Yeah.
Everything else they can produce.
Yeah.
And you can get all the food you could ever want as long as you like fish by activating your sonar.
Doubt.
One ping only. No, seriously, sonar stuns fish, and they float to the surface.
Never knew.
So it's the perfect survival place as long as you don't mind eating only fish.
Hey, it's better than nothing.
I'd object to all the
Luckily, they've got sushi chefs on board.
That's actually a plot point in Black Tide Rising series by John Ringo about the nuclear subs.
We will get onto John Ringo at some stage. We've done a request from Quack House. We can move on to John Ringo. Although, if I remember correctly, on the very first episode, the bloke's Desert Island book was the Bible, so I don't think we'll be covering that.
Well, we could just do one of the books, couldn't we?
Might be a multi-part series if we decided to cover that.
Just pick the most based book you can.
Revelations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we do Enoch? Right. Okay. The next person. I don't know why I'm struggling with everyone's name, but this one I just
Elspeth.
Elspeth. Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. She's the photographer for the rationalist group. Not really anything to mention on her. Ivan is.
She's actually, it's very important to mention her because it shows that group is not only looking to deal with the current crisis, they're also looking to document it for the future.
Mm-hmm. Which, of course, the book is a document of that future as well. So I suppose in some ways they are doing a lot right, even if initially they come across as a very
degenerate group of degenerate communists.
Yes, which I suppose they might still be.
I mean,
it seems like they've learned their lesson a bit, though.
Well, communism could work at such a small scale, right?
Not really.
I mean, one thing that's become apparent is that there's lots of groups just waiting for the opportunity to try and enact their idealism upon everyone else. You know,
Little
doesn't
mini
take
utopias.
doesn't take long, does it? Doesn't take much. You know.
No.
I'm looking at a group of people, a group right now. I'll see if I can get.
They might happen to be in this room, in this live chat.
Oh no, I'm thinking of this. Let me see if I can pull it across. Hang on, bear with me one moment. Carry on talking. I'm going to. The bloke knows what I'm talking about. Bear with me.
Should have thought.
So next we've got Ivan Simpson.
You have to refresh me which one he is.
I honestly don't recall.
He
was that memorable.
He's the pilot.
Which pilot?
Oh no, wait, that's from the movie.
Yeah, he's the chopper pilot.
What's?
I thought you called. I thought you said the pilot was the radio man.
So yes, separate. He's the one that's never flown a plane and then learns to. Ivan is flying the plane when they first go to the university, and he lands the plane when he finds the burning pile of wood that Susan sets off to attract him. So he's a pilot that comes over from the island.
Yeah.
Sorry, just on the point of people that are ready and waiting to set up a new society if there's a collapse, I just wanted to...
I wasn't even suggesting a collapse.
Oh, yeah. That's,
The Reddit meetup photo.
What sort of society do they have waiting?
Was Dr. Eggman in there?
In a sense.
Yes, yeah. Multiple, actually.
Now.
Right. Last couple. Let's push through.
Dr. Eggman was ginger.
The doctor at the bottom is the man that gives his speech on why the rationalist group are taking the actions that they are. So he's quite, as I say, he's quite eloquent, and in the audiobook, he has this very soft Scottish drawl, which is quite, comforting. It's quite convincing when you listen to it, not just read it.
Were you being seduced?
I was, yes.
To his Scottish ways.
Universities and Scottish people should never go together. They always cause trouble. But he was convincing. Right, so last one, Alf.
He had a sitcom in the end of the 80s. Was quite popular, but apparently there was a lot of the production value was quite expensive to produce, given the fact that he was a puppet. Everybody else on the sitcom hated him.
With cats becoming missing on the set.
Yeah, actually, his name was Gordon Shumway. People who don't know.
I don't even want to cover the real character after that. Let's move on. There's a transition there for some reason. Right, so not much to cover on the critical response. But I did want to mention a criticism that I wonder how people feel, labelled by current author, I think he's a contemporary author, Brian Aldiss. He describes Wyndham's work as always featuring cozy catastrophes. And what he means by that is that they are apocalypses that don't really hit home just how hard the apocalypse would be. How do you feel about that criticism?
In the context of this particular book, I think it's exactly the opposite. I think that this particular response to this particular catastrophe is what's overblown.
Yeah, I thought you'd enjoy that.
That will never happen. No, I have to object. That will never happen. It will never happen that the response to a catastrophe is overblown. That's impossible.
Yeah, the government is always and never does stupid things.
The instant that this social distancing thing over, I'm going to take my petrol generator into the middle of town and do a survey.
Yeah, I'm just saying that
Can you
if
take
people
this
just,
apart and put it together?
if
I will
people
video
just
it.
social distance from the Triffids, there wouldn't be any problem.
Exactly.
It's true. They actually 6 feet is not long enough though, because they can't they reach out 8 foot or something like that?
I think it's 10,
Yeah,
a little
well-
over
10,
10 feet.
Is it 10? Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know
two-
how much that is in superior metrics, but
10-foot social distancing. we're fine.
It's
5
about
meters?
3.5 meters.
And obviously, if you're on the equator, then you've got to stand even further away.
Well, I think they did want to do a longer distance one, but they, as usual, it's what they think they can get away with making the public do. It's like the the 5 a day fruit thing.
Oh yeah.
You know, in like the Netherlands, it's like 20 a day or something, but here they're like, 5 is probably all we can make the British eat 5 vegetables.
But in America, with the 60-foot Triffid, you need to be at least 100 meters away from it at all times.
I mean, that whip probably the stingery just cut you in half.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't eaten fruit in over 2 years, so I'm all right.
Well,
For certain values of the word, all right.
What this,
apart from the scurvy, that's absolutely fine.
This episode is more confusing than the Catch-22 one. I don't.
That's because we actually understood this book.
Arthur C. Clarke was a big fan. That's
is
all I
that
have
where
to
he
say.
got his ideas from the satellites from?
Yes, exactly. All right, final comment.
Why is his T-shirt covered in little penises?
Arthur C. Clarke had a progressive island of his own, didn't he? With special, stuff going on.
Arthur C. Clarke was one of those.
How much I can say about his proclivities?
Right, I'm ejecting.
What I don't understand about this book, because we've been going on about whether the Triffids are realistic, is do you know how hard it is to deorbit a satellite?
Not
That's
terribly.
With a comet?
Actually, it almost just as hard as orbiting a satellite. You have to brake. So
Sputnik
making
only lasts 2
weapons like
weeks.
that is really inefficient. So it would be better to use like
What are you talking
missile.
about? All satellites are naturally deorbiting at all times.
Yeah, but not on command.
Yeah, but can it not have a projectile that comes from the...
All it requires to
you-
deorbit a satellite is for its navigational system to go offline for a day.
So the next book that we're going to be looking at.
Musk's new satellites deorbit themselves automatically.
It's much more efficient to have intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, launching a plague from space is probably not the best way to do it. It doesn't seem like the most effective method.
Yeah,
Well,
because you have to spend the energy to get whatever it is up, and then you have to spend the energy to send it back down again too.
Yeah,
Whereas if you keep it here, you just ICBM it.
This
But
man,
I can imagine
this
that-
man
I can
would
imagine
launch a
that-
disease from space.
I can imagine that in 1951 this seemed like a good idea because it's given the fact that they haven't experimented a lot with satellites. It also could
new
explain
exciting tech.
why people were so scared when Sputnik 1 was going around the globe. So suddenly there was a Soviet satellite above their heads. Given the fact that the Triffids was known, it's like, oh no, God, we're going to have space weapons. So.
See, there's also the idea that the everything just Birmingham and South was knackered, but the North was great, and we just kept it like that.
But you didn't tell them. Like nobody came to save them because nobody could be bothered. So.
In
Yeah,
any event,
it's like-
Albion,
it's
I
like-
think, wants to move on to the next book.
They're having fun.
I just want this suffering to end. I don't know what's happened. Get back on the rails.
Put down your iron heel.
Very good. Right. Are there any final thoughts that don't relate to having an argument about how to deorbit a bloody satellite or
I mean,
anything?
Sputnik only stayed up for 2 weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I just want to say it's actually was a good book. I really enjoyed it. It was really nice read. Maybe that was partially in contrast to the previous book, but it was it's very enjoyable.
No, the previous book was Animal Farm.
Oh yeah, that was so short. I forgot.
Oh God.
One thing I did like is it had a lot of strong characters in it, like who weren't useless, fainting couch kind of, people, as a few of the books, or they weren't nihilistic, and they were generally,
Imagine a Victor Frankenstein in the world of David Triffids.
Oh my
exactly.
God.
Good lord.
He'd be fainting every time he saw Triffid, and the author from Fight Club would just be going out on his own to stalk deer in the wilderness or something.
Well, imagine Yossarian against the Triffid.
No. The author from Fight Club would open the gates and let the Triffids in for fun.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yossarian would bore the Triffid to death.
Yeah.
Well,
Yossarian would give some account of the 60-foot Triffid in America that no one.
I don't want to get stung by a Triffid.
Yossarian is just going to act like a Triffid and sit amongst them.
Yeah. Well, why do you have those chestnuts in your cheeks? Oh, so I can bang on them and sound like a Triffid.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Or it'd be all right though.
Why don't you ask me about
on the topic of the book, it was great to have a coherent story with that made a lot of sense with non-two-dimensional characters.
Mm-hmm.
There were still some two-dimensional characters that seemed to have been added by the author to strawman certain particular positions with which he disagreed. And if you actually take a look at it from a socio-political context, it's still another story contemporaneous to Animal Farm and other popular genres of the time about the value of central planning and non-traditional society organization. So it's not a heroic story about tradition overcoming adversity, despite the presence of individuals who were traditionalists who did clearly overcome adversity.
So it fits well in the post-World War II era.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that.
So they embraced and overcome and adopted the new normal.
The great reset happened.
I was about to say they had a great reset with the Triffids. Oh, this is not staying up for long.
This reset was awesome. It was so great.
Yeah, it was the best.
We're getting kicked off. Right, let's go. The next book we're going to take a look at is The Iron Heel. I am completely unfamiliar with it, but we're moving on from a semi-socialist writing an apocalyptic book. The previous book we read is a socialist talking about totalitarian system, and the Iron Heel is a socialist writing about a totalitarian system. So we're sticking on some themes.
There's a lot of versions of the Iron Heel of quite considerable varying lengths, like word counts.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be interesting to see who reads what.
See if we all read the same book. That'll be an interesting stream.
Maybe the next one. I mean, if it gets derailed this much, maybe the next book I'll just give everyone a different book to read.
That'd be interesting. The mystery episode. You got to figure out who read what book. They're not allowed to mention the name of the book.
Yes.
Or the subjects of it.
Or the characters.
Yeah.
Or the location.
Or the plot.
I think we've done
allowed
well.
to go on tangents.
Yeah, trying to keep somebody from ending the stream. Just keep it going and going and going and going.
I think we can get another hour out of this one easily.
At least.
Well, on that note, it was a good book. I recommend it, and happy Easter, everybody.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Happy
And we'll
Easter.
see you next time.
Yeah.
Everyone.
All right, Timey Sam.
And to all a good night. Yeah.
Goodbye.